Welcome to the channel English Epics. I waved to the security guard as if I belonged there and cheerfully wished him a good morning while heading toward the elevators. Stepping inside, I pressed the button for the third floor. When the doors opened on the count of three, I quickly stepped out and made my way straight to the employee bulletin board. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a piece of paper and pinned it to the board with thumbtacks. Then I headed to the men's restroom. Once inside, I checked each of the four stalls and, using a permanent marker, wrote the same message on all four walls. I took the stairs up to the fourth floor and repeated everything I had done on the third. Then I descended the stairs back to the lobby. A wide grin stretched across my face as I walked out the building's front door. Over and over again, people say that revenge is a dish best served cold. I never understood that saying. I could never figure out whether it meant you should wait until the person you wanted to take revenge on had forgotten about you, or if it meant that whatever you did to get revenge should be carried out in a cold-blooded manner. If it was the first, then I didn't have the patience to wait that long. And if it was the second, well, I suppose you could consider what I just did a rather cold-blooded act. And that was only half the job. The second half took place while I was sitting at my computer this morning. I figured that all hell would break loose around 10 a.m., and since it was convenient for me to take the day off work, I did just that. As soon as I got home after carrying out my little task, I picked up the phone. Then after setting everything in motion, I grabbed a good book and settled onto the couch to enjoy a pleasant, leisurely morning. It all started the way most things like this do, with an unexpected trip home in the middle of the day and the sight of a familiar car in the driveway. Why would Brian be at my house in the middle of the day? The answer became obvious the moment I stepped inside. Damn it, Marlene, you're so... Robert doesn't sleep with you anymore? Not often enough, sweetheart, and nowhere near as good as you do. Come on, baby, make me feel good. We've only got 2 hours before you have to go. I couldn't believe it. It was a damn cliche. My best friend was sleeping with my wife. And to top it all off, she was telling him that I was worthless in bed. That part really stung. I had always thought Marlene and I had a great sex life, 4 or 5 times a week, often twice in one night on those occasions, followed by a quick one in the morning before heading to work. I think most men would have stormed into the bedroom, screaming and ready to kick some ass. But I wasn't most men. Since the 8th grade, my motto had been, don't get mad, get even. I crept silently into my home office, grabbed my mini voice recorder, and inserted a fresh cassette. Then I snuck as close to the bedroom door as I dared, cracked open the linen closet and placed the recorder in the perfect spot to pick up every sound from the bedroom. After that, I quietly left the house. That evening, when I returned home, Marlene, as usual, had dinner ready. There was a fresh bottle of martini in the fridge, and we sat down, enjoying our usual pre-dinner cocktail while making small talk. How was your day, honey? Full of the usual crappy meetings and endless phone conferences. What about yours? Pretty dull. I went grocery shopping this morning, did a ton of laundry, and then spent the rest of the day reading. Anything interesting? Not really, just one of those stories about affairs. The usual kind. A wife having a dirty little fling with her husband's best friend. Yeah, pretty much. After dinner, I helped wash the dishes, grabbed my cassette recorder, and then headed to my home office to take care of some paperwork. I rewound the tape, pressed play, and listened as my wife and my so-called best friend mocked me in between rounds of sex on my own bed. What interested me most was how they planned their next meetings. They were planning to meet the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow was a day off, needed to get her hair done, you know. And Brian had arranged to spend 2 nights with Marlene when I was out of town next week. I wondered how he planned to pull that off without his wife finding out. In any case, judging by their conversation, this wasn't the first time Brian had kept Marlene company while I was away. One way or another, armed with this information, I started planning. It's truly amazing, the kind of information you can find on the internet. 2 hours of surfing, and I had almost everything I needed. A trip to Radio Shack and Electronics Avenue, along with my credit card, took care of the rest. I came home in the afternoon when I knew Marlene would be at the hair salon. Using the information I had gathered online and the equipment I had purchased, I wired a recorder to the phone line and hid a voice-activated tape recorder in the bedroom. The rest would have to wait until the weekend, when Marlene would be visiting her mother and sister. That evening when I got home, I removed the cassette from the phone recorder and listened to a 10-minute conversation between Brian and Marlene, where they gushed about how much they missed each other and how they could barely wait for the next day when they would finally be in each other's arms again. The next day, while Marlene was washing the dishes, I retrieved the tape from the bedroom recorder. Later in my office, I sat down and listened to it. Aside from the sounds of sex, I had to listen to them both talk about how clueless Bev, Brian's wife, and I were, how they had been sleeping together for over a year, and we still hadn't figured it out. Brian spoke poorly of Bev, calling her terrible in bed. But what really stunned me was Marlene pointing out all of my supposed flaws, all lies, I swear, before telling Brian how happy she was to have him in her life. I stashed the cassette in a safe place and inserted a new one into the recorder. By the time I left for Seattle on Monday, my bedroom was wired for both video and audio. I had set up 3 mini cameras recording everything that happened in the room and transmitting it to 3 electronically controlled VCRs hidden inside the cabinet in my office. A test run showed that as long as the room was well lit, I could get a decent picture. It was an expensive setup, but fortunately, I could afford it. Besides, it would more than pay for itself when the time came for the divorce settlement. Motion sensors activated the cameras, and once the cameras were on, they triggered the VCRs. If no movement was detected for 5 minutes, the cameras would shut off, which in turn stopped the VCRs. As my flight took off, I eagerly anticipated reviewing some interesting footage when I got home. I would have been furious if the setup hadn't worked. I waited until 10 p.m. to call Marlene, knowing from the recorded conversations that Brian planned to be there by 7. Marlene answered, slightly out of breath. I asked her about it, and she said she had been using her exercise bike in the basement and was talking to me on the cordless phone. Midway through our conversation, I heard a sharp intake of breath, and without a doubt, I knew the recording would show exactly what Brian was doing to Marlene at that moment. We talked for another minute or so, and then I told her I loved her and missed her. She responded in kind, and I hung up the phone. The next evening, the call was almost an exact replica of the previous one, except this time, I mentioned that I would be incredibly tense when I got home. Marlene said that was good because she planned to wear me out with sex as soon as I returned, and she did. That night when I got home, I fell asleep utterly exhausted. Marlene couldn't keep her hands off me, and I was almost tempted to ask why she thought I was so terrible in bed, but that would have ruined my surprise. The next day I reviewed the footage from all 3 VCRs. I found some good shots, a few really great ones, and plenty of worthless ones. But the most important thing was that I had more than enough usable footage. Still, I wasn't done. Not yet. Over the next 3 weeks, the VCRs and cassette recorders automatically turned on whenever Brian showed up to have his fun with Marlene. On Saturday, while Marlene was visiting her mother and sister, I sat down, reviewed everything I had, and started working with it. I had several clips that were nearly professional quality, and by mixing them with the just good footage, I compiled a video almost 2 hours long. I also recorded a smaller cassette, one I planned to keep for myself. Most of the footage was just touching and sex, but what mattered most to me was clarity. For my plan to work, it was absolutely essential that I had plenty of footage where both Brian and Marlene were unmistakably recognizable. The day I had been waiting for finally arrived. I packed copies of everything I had into 2 packages, then took them to the post office and sent them out. It was Saturday morning, and I requested delayed delivery by 2 days, ensuring the packages would arrive on Monday. Then I went home and set the rest of my plan in motion. 2 days later, a few keystrokes on my computer and a visit to Brian's workplace, and it was all over. All I had to do now was sit back and wait. Marlene came home after her weekly beauty salon visit and was surprised to find me lying on the couch, reading a book. She had picked up some groceries on the way, so she headed to the kitchen to put them away. "Honey, did you know the phone is disconnected?" "No, sweetheart, I didn't. I must have unplugged it when I made myself a sandwich and didn't notice." She had barely placed the receiver back on the hook when the phone rang. "Hello? What? Are you sure? What are you going to do?" "Okay, I'll go check." "Repeat that. Where did you say it was?" I heard her step out of the kitchen and head toward the living room, where we kept the computer. About 2 minutes passed, and then I heard a sharp scream. I smirked to myself as Marlene watched her own personal adult video. 2 minutes later, she stormed into the room. "You bastard! What have you done?" "I made you famous, sweetheart. By now, your name should be making the rounds, at least among Brian's colleagues. Unfortunately for him, he works for a company owned by his father-in-law. But hey, according to him, Bev was a lousy wife anyway, so he won't miss her when she leaves. And I doubt he'd want to keep his job if it means facing his former father-in-law every day. Then again, he might not even have a say in whether he stays or goes. That will probably depend on how his father-in-law feels when he opens the website and sees what Brian had to say about Bev." I glanced at the clock. Bev should be opening her package right about now, at least if the post office delivered it on time to Bev Street. "Package? What package?" "Nothing special, just copies of all the recordings I made of you and Brian over the past 3 weeks." "Oh my God, how could you do this to me?" "It was easy, Marlene. All I had to do was remember that you stabbed me in the back, right alongside the idiot who was supposed to be my best friend. And trust me, the worst part for you hasn't even begun yet. I'd say that won't happen until around 5:30 or 6 this evening." The phone rang. I smirked. Or maybe sooner. "Hello? Oh, hi, Mom." "What?" I didn't hear anything else after that. Marlene had gone silent. I got up and followed her into the kitchen, where she stood, pale as a ghost, clutching the phone while her mother spoke on the other end of the line. "Something wrong?" I asked innocently. "How could you send that to my parents as an anniversary gift?" "Oh, come on, sweetheart. At least I remembered their anniversary. What else did you do?" "Well, I posted the link to your website on the wall of every lousy place Brian works at, along with a little message. For a good time, call Marlene at, and, of course, I included your mobile number. I also put the same thing on every bulletin board there. Let's see, what else did I do? Oh, right. I sent an email to everyone in your contact list. The subject line read, 'Hey, check out the new me.' And naturally, I attached some files. I really wish I could be there to see your grandma's face when she watches you begging Brian to take you from behind." She stared at me for almost a full minute before finally whispering, "How can you hate me this much?" "It was easy, Marlene. All I had to do was watch the recordings and listen to what you said about me when you were with Brian." Speaking of Brian, by now Bev has probably already thrown him out. "Why don't you give him a call? Maybe he'll let you move in with him." "What? Why would you say something like that? Why, for the love of God, would I ever want to live with that idiot?" "I don't know, Marlene, but you're not staying here. I took you at your word. I'm stupid, I'm worthless in bed, and I'm not such a great husband. I recorded every bit of it, Marlene, so pack your things and get out." Just then, the phone rang again. You should probably answer that. It's probably your boyfriend, calling to cry on your shoulder. Marlene picked up the phone, then hesitated and handed it to me. "It's for you." I took the phone and immediately recognized the voice. It was Bev. "I got an interesting package in the mail today. No return address, but for some reason, its contents made me think of you. Know anything about that? Guilty as charged. Sorry if it upset you, but I had this uncontrollable urge to get a little revenge. Don't apologize. I've suspected that idiot was cheating on me for a while, but I could never prove it. Thanks, I owe you one. So what's your next move?" I glanced at Marlene and said, "She'll be out of here within the hour." "I'm surprised you're giving her that much time. All I did was call that asshole and tell him not to bother coming home. Ever. My father called me an hour ago, asking what I wanted done about him, so I told him. Brian is now officially unemployed. Anyway, I owe you one. Once the dust settles, I'll let you buy me a drink. Deal. Talk to you later." I hung up the phone and turned to Marlene. "You're still here,